Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. I'm Randall and this is Flomaton Famous. I recently posted the success I was having with my fig cuttings and somebody responded and said, Randall, next time can you please make a video of how you're getting 94% success rate from rooting your fig cuttings? Well, here are my fig cuttings, at least a portion of them, and follow along and we're going to show you what we're doing to get cuttings rooted like this. All right, we're out here in our front orchard and we're also shaping up our fig trees while we're taking cuttings. In my previous video, I said that I wanted at least 3 stalks, 3 to 4 from the base, and everything else gets trimmed out and utilized for rooting cuttings. So we're going to pick 3 good branches that we're going to leave and we're going to trim out the rest. Happens to be that this variety is Dominic Italian. So what I'll do is I'll go ahead and trim off the leaves and leave those out here to be mulched around the fig trees here soon. This one actually still has a fig on it. It's not ripened yet. Most of our figs have already gone for the year. Go ahead and trim him right off there. All right, we've got our cutting that we took and we brought it back into our shop. The shop is actually where I have my wax, and we're going to put a wax coating over the tips of every end that we cut. First, let's make our cuttings out of this one stick. The general rule is at least 3 nodes. It happens to be that at every node there's a mass of differentiated cells that can become anything that it needs to be. So in this case, we're going to force one of these to want to become roots. We're going to do that with rooting hormone, and we're going to leave the tips, and from that little bud, each one of these little buds, each one of these nodes is where the shoots are going to come from. I like to take about 6 inches. We're going to have more than 3 nodes on this cutting, but I want to go just about a 1/4 inch right below a node, and we're going to really get it down to where those differentiated cells are wanting to root out the bottom of that cutting right there. Now, since there's not really an open wound up here, you don't really have to dip these in wax, but I'm dipping every one of mine in wax, and I'm covering them as much in wax as I possibly can to preserve moisture loss, that while these things are in pots, they don't lose enough moisture up here, and gives it really all the time it needs to be able to set roots and hold as much moisture in this cutting as possible. Now let's talk about what wax we're using. I went to the thrift store and I found this electric soup pot, and this one happens to be made by Rival. And I came back home and I looked up on Amazon. I think these are going for just under $20. And it's just to make hot soup in. Walked one aisle over and I bought a stainless steel little pot that you would pour gravy or creamer out of here. With it being stainless steel, I didn't really have to worry about it rusting. And I set that right down in there, and I fill this as much water as I can without it actually bubbling over. Now, when I went to the thrift store and I looked for something to do this with, I specifically wanted something deep, long, and cylindrical so that I can cover the most of these cuttings up with wax. I was thinking of like a tall can of asparagus. You've seen those, are kind of small, skinny, but real tall, but they tend to rust. I feel like this stainless steel, I'm not gonna have a problem with this. And I picked all this up, you know, for under 10 bucks. I came out and I gave it I adjusted the temperature on the front to where this would just be under boiling, and in about 30 minutes it starts to melt the wax that I have inside my pot here. Now the wax that I'm using is a blend. If you buy just Gulf wax off the shelf of a grocery store or dollar store or wherever you shop at, it tends to want to crumble off. It's a little too stiff once it cools down, and it doesn't really stick to the sticks if they get bumped around a lot. So you want to kind of soften that up. And what I did is I went across the street to my local beekeeper and I got a block of beeswax. If you put that in there, it's gonna bind with this very well and adds a little bit more pliability to it. All right, now one other type of wax that you can use is if you go to the hardware store and you pick up a wax ring that goes under a toilet. You can pick these up, and this wax is probably $1 or $2 for this. This is real cheap, and it'll help make these other waxes go a lot further if you're worried about using a lot of your wax. This can be pricey. Beeswax can be very pricey. There's a high dollar value, especially on beeswax. So this will make your wax go a little bit further. This is really gummy too, and so this helps it stick to your cutting very well. So we'll go ahead and make the rest of our cuttings. 1, 2, 3, and then I'll come down below that bud right there, make a cutting. Keep in mind which way's up, because you don't want to plant these upside down. And I'll show you a demonstration of me doing the exact same thing in a little bit. 1, 2, 3 nodes, and then we'll cut at the 4th. And that's going to leave us a 4th cutting right at about the same size as the rest of them. So when you're dipping your cuttings, it's just quick in, quick out. You don't want to leave it in there and start cooking the outside of your cutting. I've not had an issue with that, but that's why I keep this at the lowest temperature possible without the wax hardening back over the top and forming a crust. I want to keep it right at the melting point. So just dip and then right back out, and see there it's already turning white and it's sealing up. Set that off to the side. One more time with this one. Buds up, dip. If you're concerned about not sealing that again, you can just give it a little dip right on the tip and put a little extra on there. If you're worried about losing moisture through that end, you don't feel comfortable with the amount of wax you've got on there. But when you're dipping it at this depth, that's a good amount of cutting that's going to be above the soil. And with us using our 2-inch cutting, 2-inch pots, you're going to have 1, 2 nodes where possible roots can form down in the soil. That goes a lot quicker if you're doing a bunch of cuttings rather than using a paraffin tape and you just taping up the ends. Some people like to do that, but if you've got a bunch of cuttings that you want to do, I recommend going with a heating device such as this soup cooker here in a pot. All right, now let's go on out to the greenhouse. We're going to stick our cuttings, and we're going to talk about some of the secrets and key points that you should really pay attention to when you're attempting to root cuttings from your figs. All right guys, we're out of the greenhouse. This is my main propagation area. Let's talk about some of the key factors when rooting figs. People will tell you time and time again to, once you stick your cuttings, put your cuttings over in a shaded area. Happens to be that we're late in the fall here, and it's November here in South Alabama. We're zone 9, and it's a long time before we get to a hard freeze. Right now it happens to be perfect time for rooting cuttings. Today's high is 85. It'll be in the 80s the rest of this week, dipping down into the 70s in about 10 days from now. The greenhouse here has a shade cloth of about 50% shade. So we still have in here a proper amount of light for rooting cuttings, because it's going to keep out the hot, intense sun, but we're actually are at the optimum temperatures. We're dipping down to about 67, 68 degrees at night, And our average daytime high right now is about 80 to 82. It just happens to be that today was a spike up to 85. But this is really good weather. One of the things we didn't talk about previously was when you're taking your cuttings, you want to get lignified first year wood. This is all wood that grew this year. And it's better wood to root from than older, harder, whiter wood with thicker bark, and it's got a lot more age on it. These just happen to root a lot better. So that's what we're doing here, is we're getting lignified. Lignified means isn't this young, tender green growth here anymore. It's done hardened up and turned brown. That brown is actually what we're referring to when we're talking about lignified wood. If you get cuttings with this young tender green right there, very difficult to root. You really have to have a perfect environment like a tissue culture lab or something like that when you're rooting something that tender. But for the backyard gardener who wants to root a few cuttings to sell or give out to friends, this is the best way to do it. Since I'm a licensed nursery, I've invested in some pots, and we went with the 2-inch nursery pots, and you can find these online, very easy to find. And then I got the 32 count trays to go with it. The trays have holes in the bottoms. They don't hold water. You do not want these cuttings to sit in very soggy conditions, because then they're prone to rot. Now, the rooting medium that I'm using, this one happens to be ProMix BH, which is it's a type of potting mix. It's very well draining, and it doesn't hold moisture at all. Matter of fact, it tends to want to be a drier mix. So also this Pro Mix has a mycorrhiza in it, which is it's a fungus like a mushroom that will bond to these new roots and will help feed those plants. More of a symbiotic relationship that they trade nutrients back and forth. So that's what we're using here, ProMix BX. It's kind of expensive, but you're definitely going to have a higher success rate with this than you will with a moisture retaining potting mix. Your cuttings are more apt to rot if you use one that really retains the moisture. I got several different rooting hormones here. If you just want to root a few cuttings in your backyard, if you take about 10 cuttings, you can expect about 50% of those cuttings to root. But if you want to increase the chances and get a little bit more success, you can go with a rooting hormone. And it happens to be that you can buy this one right off the shelf at like Walmart, Lowe's, or Home Depot. So this is the very first one I've ever tried to use. So the active ingredient in this one happens to be 0.10%. Now I went with Hormodin 3, which is a lot more intense. The active ingredient in this one is 0.8%. So there's a lot more rooting hormone in this one. So what I've done is I've taken an old bottle here that I ran out, and I had to go buy a new one. And recently I've done all these cuttings with the Hormodin 3. Rather than dip my cuttings into this and caking it onto the bottoms, I don't really want them to be caked on all that thick. So what I've done is I've poured a little bit over into a small bottle, and there's just enough to dust a cutting right down in the bottom of that. So what I'll do is I'll take my cutting and I'll stick in there, and I use my cutting and kind of bounce it around and just lightly dust that cutting. See how it's not caked on there? I didn't wet these cuttings. If I put any moisture on here at all, it'd really cake on there, and I don't want to do that. Too much BA, which is the active ingredient, could actually do the reverse of what you're trying to do. It could hinder root development. So I'll stick my cutting in there. As soon as you stick a cutting, you also want to write on there what that is. Because I tend to want to use these over and over again, I use a pencil. Pencil, believe it or not, really does stick on here and it doesn't fade in the sun. This happens to be Dominic Italian. And I'll just pencil that on there real quick. Pop that right in the pot with it. And then I'll go ahead and stick these other cuttings while I've got you here on the camera. And you can see how much of this is in the soil and how much is above the soil, and there's very little exposed that is not covered in wax. I've gotten, on average, 2 nodes below the soil on each one of those. Now, when I was talking about 98%, they're like, Randall, how did you determine that you, or 94% success rate, how did you determine that you were getting 94% success rate? That's a little absurd. I'm not sure I believe it. I didn't believe it either. I came out and I counted that I've got 32, 32, 32, 32, 32. And then I went through and I've picked some of these out that the cuttings didn't take for whatever reason. You're going to have cuttings that fail. I pulled those out and I did the math. That's how I come up with 94% success rate. So these are more recent cuttings that I've done. These are some that are a little bit older and they're actually ready to up pot. And when I up pot them in these tree pot containers, which are 4 inches by 4 inches, and then about 9 inches tall there, depending on which ones you order, how tall the pot is. And so here are some that I rooted about 2 months ago, and these are almost ready to ship or sell to whoever wants to buy them. This one happens to be Negra de Agde, but that's about a 2-month-old cutting right there. So I'm having really good success rate with this method. If you're wanting to do a lot of cuttings and get good success rate, the key points is well draining potting mix, such as a Pro Mix BX or an HP, high porosity, which means it sheds water. Make sure that you're using a shaded area. Your temperatures are also optimum. Like I said, we're about 80 degrees right now. We're going to be dropping off. I've got to hurry up and finish out my cuttings for the year. This is about all I'm going to be able to do this year because my fig tree orchard is so small. This is all the cuttings that I could take, and I'm trying to really grow my trees out where next year I'll have a lot more cuttings available and ready to go out to the market for any of you guys who are wanting any of my cuttings. Just in case you were going to ask where am I be selling my cuttings, I do sell them local. So if you're local to our area, you can reach out to me. We can meet. You can come over. I'll see what rooted cuttings I've got. I do intend on placing some on the website called Fig Bid, which is like eBay, but just for figs. And there's some other fruit trees on there also. So those are the 2 main areas that I intend on selling these trees at starting off. So shade cloth, proper mix, a little bit of rooting hormone, and make sure that you're sealing the end cuts of your cuttings. I hope you find this information informative. I hope you enjoyed the video. Like, share it, and subscribe if this is your first time watching. All right, remember, keep growing, keep building, and always keep adventuring. Together, we're Flemington Famous. We'll see you on the next one.